All right. Well, welcome, welcome. Appreciate everyone showing up to the hot box. Unfortunately, the AC may not be working just up to par right yet, so we're hopeful that that will kick in at some point. But thank you all for showing up. Really appreciate it. Of course, this is the blockchain session that we're going to get into. I am Joe Raczynski. I'm a technologist for Thomson Reuters. I spend half of my day working with a team on products and services that Thomson Reuters has. And then the other portion of the time is really spending time with law firms, corporations, as well as government agencies about what's going on in their environments, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're trying to do with technology in their realm of legal. It's an amazing thing to do, to be involved with. The other portion of my time is spent basically going up and down the East Coast, talking with attorneys, partners about the trends that are happening currently right now. So I've spent a lot of time on blockchain myself. I've been, for better or worse, involved with Bitcoin since 2011. So I have some historical perspective on it, but also spend time on AI as well as analytics and other pieces too. So.
Hi, I am Sarah Bruno. I am a partner at Arent Fox. I'm the chair of the cybersecurity group there. I've been with Arent Fox for about 20 years, and I started, one of the first matters I worked on was with AOL, and at that point AOL was this company that was doing new things. So since that trend, I've been in this, for some reason I've always been in the bucket of liking these companies that are doing new things, and here we are now talking about blockchain, which is probably in another year not going to be a new thing anymore. But certainly that's one of the reasons I've been interested in it. I do a lot of work in the tech space. I also work in the automotive industry and entertainment, and these are three areas where this tends to come up a little bit. So looking forward to talking to you today. I think we're going to reserve the questions for the end, but certainly please do let us know if you have questions, and we'll try to make sure that we have time for that at the end.
Perfect. And one other point that I want to make is that hopefully you all have put in your business cards into the box. At the end, we'll have a drawing for 2 prizes. One, I believe, is an Apple Watch, so definitely stick around for that because you have to be present. And the other one is a gift certificate for Apple, too. So, all right, blockchain. So we're going to dive into several different aspects about it. I'm going to take a step back in a moment and actually talk about where we are with technology first, because I think it's important to sort of level set on that. We're going to talk about blockchain itself, define it, and what's happening now for law firms in this space. We'll dig into it. What's currently happening, what should we start thinking about, and then we'll get into the legal challenges around this too. And certainly there are many, as this is a very early stages time for this technology. So also what the future may look like with blockchain too. And lastly, I'm curious, how many people are familiar with ICOs here? Okay. How many people have invested in ICOs? Okay. All right, so we'll get into that. I'll tell you a little bit about that as well, because I think it's an unbelievable phenomenon that's happening right now that we all should be aware of at a bare minimum. So we'll get into that too. So first and foremost, I think this is really critical to understanding what's happening around us right now. I won't spend too much time on this, but right now I believe we're living exponentially. We heard about this, of course, at the first talk yesterday in terms of what we're seeing and our growth around us. So everything is exponential, both personally as well as what's going on in our professional lives. No question. So when we take a step back from that, what does linear actually look like? And this is something that we hear about from Singularity University. What does linear actually look like? Linear is what we're sort of trained to think about. That is me taking maybe 30 steps from here, I'll get to the back of the room. That's how our minds sort of think currently. So I'm taking 30 linear steps, I'm actually walking 30 yards. Our minds have not changed. Our brains have not physically changed in over 250,000 years. It's hard to think about that because it's just everything around us has. So if we go back to the plains of Africa, 250,000 years ago, we're talking about us knowing our relatives, knowing where to get food, knowing where to get water. Everything was within realm. We all knew where to get to what. The minds haven't changed. So if we start thinking about this exponential phase that we're entering right now, if we were to take that exponential, what does that feel like, and apply it to what we just mentioned? So if I were to take 30 exponential steps, what does that actually look like? You're actually traveling around the world 26 times. it's hard for us to sort of conceptualize what exponential is, but of course, it's the doubling of what you see. And so it's that graphic that we have been, I guess, more accustomed to seeing these days. And this is part of what we're starting to experience. So if moving forward, we're seeing this in many different industries, right? So it's almost trite to say, but Amazon's experimenting with this currently in terms of drone deliveries up in Canada. They can't do it in the United States really right now. We're certainly seeing it with autonomous cars. We're getting to the point of democratization of these technologies where it may have cost several $billion to actually develop this years ago. You can actually buy a kit for your car right now to turn your car into an autonomous car. Not probably the wisest thing to do, but you can actually do that now, and it's not that expensive to do. Other things, of course, biometric. We've seen biomedical. We've seen this change as well. And then the phone, maybe 30 years ago was this massive old phone, and then you move to all these separate devices 10 years ago. It's just 10 years ago that we had all of those separate devices, the boombox, all of your books in separate things. Now it's all, of course, into one. So why is this all happening, and why is this going to impact us currently, and how it's going to play out with blockchain is simple. I think it's three forces. I call it the trinity of forces. The first force is cloud storage. 1965, IBM had a massive computer, probably half the size of this room. It cost $150,000. It had about 5 megabytes of RAM. Now, of course, you can buy a chip off of Amazon that's going to be 128 gigs, and it's the size of your fingernail. That exponential growth. So unlimited storage is the first. The second is processing power. So the processing power of your computer, of course, how many calculations it can do per second, right? So that's changed dramatically. To me, the best graphic to sort of conceptualize this is simply this. On the x-axis, you have the dates, time. On the y-axis, you actually have the calculations. So easiest way to say this, in 2001, you bought a $1,000 computer off of Best Buy. It had the processing power of a gnat. Fast forward to 2009, it had the processing power, $1,000 computer, the processing power of a rat, a mouse. Fast forward to roughly 2024 to 24, and you're looking at the processing power of the human brain. Going out to 2040 to 2044, you're looking at the processing power of all of mankind at that point. So 8 to 9 billion people in that $1,000 computer that you bought. That's the second. And the third, of course, as we hear all the time, nonstop, the algorithms, so AI. All of those things combining allows for this types of things to happen. We're starting to see a lot of changes. So we get to blockchain. So blockchain is leveraging all of these right now, and it is really starting to take off. So history of it. We all probably are aware of this at this point, but it comes down to, it's the underlying technology of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin came about in 2008, 2009. It was right after the financial crisis when you had single entities, massive financial institutions going down, just blowing up overnight. It was one group that was controlling tons of money, tons of power. So a white paper came out, and it said, hey, let's flip this. Let's try to think about this in a different way. Can we distribute that so that it's not just one entity if that goes down, but you have multiple? So the essence behind blockchain is that you basically have a peer-to-peer network that is spread out among, let's say, 1,000 or 10,000 computers. So if one of those computers goes down, the whole network does not go down. You'd have to take down the entire thing, which is nearly impossible. So in the case of, I think, Bitcoin probably has 10,000 nodes, I think, at least at this point, or computers that are running. And then the basics behind it. So it's peer-to-peer. There's no central authority like we were talking about before. It relies on cryptography. So it's high levels of encryption that are baseline part of this as well. And each one of the nodes, when something exchanges money, so if I'm sending money to Sarah, and we'll go through this in just a second, all the nodes basically have to agree that this is happening. So it's not just one that can be corrupted. They all have to believe in this and occur and agree, I guess. So really quickly, this graphic basically says, you know, if I'm sending money to another person, let's check to see if they have any money in their account. And everyone basically has a digital wallet. The wallet is simply this. It's an elongated string of numbers and letters. That's yours. That's your ID, basically. So if you open up a wallet or you downloaded a wallet, it would give you that address, and then you'd find out the address of the other person, and you'd send the money to them. This, of course, branches out into a ton of different directions besides money that we'll get into in a bit, but I think Bitcoin is probably the easiest way to describe this initially. So it goes out, it finds out that I actually have money in my account that's already stored up in the blockchain being a database. That's all it is. Blockchain is a distributed database that allows you to find out how much is there, then I send it to her, and she confirms it, and then it's added to that block, to that permanent block that's immutable, so you cannot change it. So going forward, it's distributed, it's decentralized, immutable, obviously cryptography is involved, and then it's open source too. So what is happening now for law firms in this space?
So as I said in the beginning, I mean, certainly as lawyers, we're often paying attention to what our clients are paying attention to. And in 2016, even though Bitcoin had been around for a while, that's when we all started to wake up because some of the big names were paying attention. We have Goldman Sachs. Certainly it was becoming apparent that we were going to have to understand what blockchain is. And I can say that Joe here studies this, and it says that most people have just kind of a high-level view of blockchain, and certainly that's the case in the legal realm. I mean, we've gotten our hands around it, we're getting our hands around it, but I always rely on someone like him or someone in my firm who is a technologist and studies this when we're working with clients on these issues. But that's what firms are doing, is that we're hiring people like Joe to come and work with us and partner with us so that we can assist our clients on solutions involving blockchain. So that's where we are now at this point. I'd say at 2017, we're developing groups that are focused on this. I think it's going to change the way law schools work at this point. Just once we get into some of the details here, you'll see how it changes the way we are lawyers. And I don't know, do we have a lot of lawyers in the audience here? If anyone wants to actually admit to being a lawyer? No. Okay, so we have a few, but I won't spend too much. But having gone through law school and learning how to write, an 80-page contract, I don't think that that's going to be in 10 years. They're going to be doing the same thing once you see some of the contracts that we have to show you what a smart contract is. But so from the legal standpoint, we're just basically trying to keep in step with our clients who are heavy into this technology, and we're trying to apply laws that are very old to this new technology, and it's very difficult. The reason I mentioned AOL in the beginning is because I remember it was very similar when AOL came out. Everybody was trying to apply these laws that just did not work to a system like AOL. Now it seems silly because we've developed laws, we've just interpreted things in ways to make it work. But we're in the same position with blockchain. We're in this unregulated space, and we're trying to find kind of a harmonization of those laws to apply. And so we're studying that, and I mean, at this point, it's a lot of conjecture, but we certainly have had some guidance from regulators, which we'll get into in a few slides.
So it's definitely interesting to see sort of the perspective of what's going on. So as she was mentioning, basically last year was sort of an awareness campaign. When I would speak with like CIOs of various firms, they were trying to sort of become the evangelists within their firm to really say, okay, we have experts in whatever field they may be within the law. Let me present this as a new technology, a brand new technology that will absolutely revolutionize a lot of the things that we're going to be dealing with going forward, and sort of present it to them. Now they're starting to put their heads around it, wrap their heads around it, and say, oh, what can I do within my practice area? What can I build? Or what could we build as a firm? Because now more firms are starting to get more developers. What could we do to potentially leverage this? So those are the types of things that are definitely happening. What you see up on the screen right now are sort of things I think everyone should probably be aware of in the big. First is Ethereum. Everyone familiar with Ethereum at this point? Basically, it's sort of like it's a newer platform that built out on sort of the original Bitcoin platform, but instead, what's great about Ethereum is that it also has its own blockchain or database, but allows you to program on top of it. So if you want to program anything you want, and then reference to that blockchain or that database, you can do so. That's where a lot of large organizations are starting to deal with that right now. R3, which is sort of the R and then the cube on top of it, is a consortium of about 50 different banks. Once the banks realized that blockchain is actually real and going to take off, they got very nervous because, of course, that could completely and totally disrupt them. So they said, let's band together, let's work on something, and hopefully maybe they'll come up with their own blockchain within their sphere. IBM's, obviously you heard today, if you went to the keynote this morning, they're talking about blockchain. Microsoft's been involved in this as well. T3, it's the largest ICO that's ever happened. It occurred about a month ago. They raised, I think, $250 million in a short period of time, which is, again, we'll get into the ICOs in a second, but they are also sort of like the Ethereum next generation. So they're going to try to take it to a whole new world. So we'll dive into some of the legal issues now.
So I think one of the first that and when I'm speaking with Joe about this as well, I mean, I think what companies that I work with or clients that I work with have a hard time is understanding the confidentiality of that transaction that you explained. And if you don't mind, I would like to just kind of for the group explain the confidentiality and the exchange of that money, just if we could focus on that. If I do give you, so do you want to walk through it and then we can talk about the legal issues in that way?
Sure.
Yeah.
So currently, if I'm going to send her money through Bitcoin right now, all wallets are actually public. So if you have her wallet address, which is just something that she would give me, I could actually go on to any one of 20 or 30 different sites. I can plug that thing in, which is probably 18 to 20 characters long, again, a mixture of random letters and numbers, and it'll tell me what's in her wallet. Straight up, how much is in there. I don't know who it is unless she tells me, hey, this is my address. But the clarity there, the transparency there is a positive, but also can be a challenge too, I think.
So, and that is I think the challenge with that, that's what a lot of people are worried about. And certainly you have a pass key to help protect it. So it's your wallet, you're the only one that has the pass key to that wallet. But similarly, there's this idea of this freedom, which really is quite limited because it is encrypted. But still, there's this feeling, this fear of allowing everyone to see what's in your, or allowing one person even to see what's in your wallet. You can control it to somewhat so that they can only see certain things, but certainly that's what a lot of the clients I work with, that's the concern. And again, when you look at the law of protecting data, it's a mess. You know, different countries protect data in different ways. People see data differently depending on their age. Certainly someone who's the age of 18 sees their data very differently as someone as the age of 72. So you have to deal with that issue as well. So I think it's going to be a challenge until, frankly, just like with all technology, the awareness and understanding of the privacy and the security of what's in the chain becomes more prevalent and allows people to have a little bit more control. And I don't know if you want to touch on any of the control that you can have. I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
Fine.
But this is certainly kind of the discussion we have as lawyers, is trying to figure out how to apply all those laws that are all over the globe. For example, in Europe in May of 2018, individuals have to have access to the data that they have. How is that going to work with blockchain? If I can access it to delete it or change it, is that going to be the case? And we don't know. I know these issues are still being worked out, but these are the challenges. You have these laws that are written thinking people have data in their wallet that they carry around with them. They may store it on their own computer, but suddenly you have the blockchain, which changes the perception of data, and we're stuck with applying these laws to a technology that's moving much more quickly than we are, as you said in your opening moment. But so that's the privacy and security, is this action, the access issue, the encryption, certainly the fact that once it's out there, what do you do at the end of the transaction and your data's out there? Can you get it back? And again, I don't know if you know the answer to that. I know it's a shifting paradigm, it's a shifting discussion.
You can't. So if you were to send money to somebody and you put in the wrong address, it's gone. It's gone forever, and there's no way to get it back, quite honestly. So, if you are sending money to somebody else or to another organization, I triple check every single time I send anything out.
Yeah.
So, because there's no way to get back.
So that's the privacy. That's the feeling that we have. And again, I think we're years from having laws that work, and so we're going to be stuck. And I say that because even now, with the internet being the age it is, we're still trying to figure out laws to make it work. So I can't imagine it's going to take us another 10 years probably to figure it out. So as lawyers, we're just left with this patchwork of laws that are jurisdictional as well. And again, this is another issue, is that these transactions are global. So whose law controls? What are you going to look to? Certainly you're going to look at the most lenient law, and that's the one that you want to control the transaction. But as a lawyer, you're thinking, well, you may not be able to control it if there's an issue with a transaction and they're sitting in a country that laws favor them and they were the ones that had the risk associated with the transaction. They're going to certainly argue that their laws control. So it's going to be a mess. I'm not saying we won't figure it out, but because like I said, the internet gave us these same issues, and we cobbled together some laws to make it work. So. Jurisdictional contracts, we're going to talk about the self-executing contracts and how blockchain has changed that. Fraud, it helps with fraud, certainly with respect to paper transactions, for the reasons Joe mentioned in the beginning, because you have those nodes that sort of have to recognize each other, and all of them have to work together for the transaction to be consummated. So in that, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So the fraud thing is really fascinating to think about, because I know that like FinCEN is working on this right now when it comes to like Bitcoin. So Bitcoin originally got its big name because people were buying and selling things, of course, on the dark web, where you could buy drugs and you want anonymity. You could use Bitcoin to buy it, of course. Surprisingly enough, Bitcoin is generally anonymous, but there are ways of trying to get actually to the person. There are newer currencies that are coming out, or newer tokens that are coming out that claim complete anonymity. And so in those instances, I think that our federal government, as well as a lot of other organizations, are going to have a major hard time going forward trying to figure this out.
Okay, and I think I covered all of that. The IP is the last one, is that, of course, there's a lot of debate over who owns the IP in various systems. So that's something that, I think, but that, again, is happening with all technology. It's not really unique to this industry, but certainly it's another hurdle that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and so much of it is open source, so that makes it even more complicated, right?
Yeah, parts of it, yep. Yeah. Okay, so we want to talk about those smart contracts.
Yeah. So let's jump into the smart contract. And if any of you have seen this before, I apologize. I probably have said it one too many times in my day. But this, I think, encapsulates what a smart contract and how it works, and makes it sort of relevant within the industry. So I'm an attorney, and I am in wills and estates, and I draw up a will for a family. It's a bizarre will, I grant you that, so I apologize in advance. But the will basically says this. It says, upon the parent's death, they have two kids, kid A and kid B. They both have to be married to split the estate. If they don't, if one kid's married and one's not, then the entire estate goes to the individual that's married. Simple as that. So in this instance, what you do is you have the attorney, they draw up the contract just like they would any other time, and then it's codified. So it's literally put into a machine that says, okay, what are the trigger points? I'm not expecting anybody to actually read through that code, so what I'm going to do here is say, okay, the code says, okay, what am I supposed to do? Every day, I'm going to check to see if, through an API, a call to a trusted source, maybe it's Thomson Reuters, maybe it's the federal government, or whatever the case is, to find out if the parents are alive. One day, the computer says, they're actually both dead. Sadly, although the computer doesn't have a heart, it goes on to the next thing. It says, all right, what's my next task? My next task is actually to reach out to the same state, federal, local government and find out if both kids are married. It says, one kid is married and one is not. And it automatically transfers, let's say all of this, the estate is in cash at this point. It transfers that money to the kid that's married. That whole right-hand side, after the attorney on the left-hand side to put this thing together, is done automatically. So no human intervention whatsoever. It's sort of like this evolution of a smart contract, leveraging a lot of different components and storing it on the blockchain. That's where we're going. I mean, I've seen this within leases as well. So I saw another organization put together basically a landlord-tenant lease that was put together in just a certain form function, and then it's stored on the blockchain. So it's something that they can always refer to that's permanent and there forever.
So obviously, from my standpoint, that's going to make things a lot easier, because you can just look to see at all these fact-based occurrences and look at the ledger to find these facts and find out what happens upon death. On the other hand, like I said in the beginning, it's very difficult to have these agreements. I mean, that was a very simplified agreement, but some of them are going to be much more difficult, and it's not going to work for all scenarios, certainly bigger transactions. Although I was going to say transactions in order involving more value, but then you're talking about a death here. But certainly the bigger transactions that involve a lot of money, I don't know how it's going to be a little bit more riskier to put it into the code, I think, at least right now. But here's the definition of a smart contract. It's a consensual arrangement between at least two parties for an automated independent commercial result, determined through code of a factual condition. So it's automated, and the example, and you've probably heard this example, but the vending machine is, in the legal world, when you have a valid contract, you have an offer, an acceptance, and consideration. Consideration is something of value that's exchanged between the two parties. So a vending machine is a good example, and it also is a really rudimentary example of what a smart contract is, which is you have the offer, which is the money, you're inserting it into the machine. Something falls down, that's the acceptance of the offer, they give you the property. The consideration, again, is the money, something of value. That's, in essence, what a smart contract at its very basic form is, and that sounds very easy for real property transactions. Where we're starting to see them is, and we'll get into this as real estate a little bit, but a good example would be if you have a storage locker or a storage bin. You know, that's something that's very easy for a smart contract. You give them money, and you're giving probably Bitcoin right through, and you're getting immediate access to that locker. There's one condition, which is the money changing, and you get the locker for a period of time. When the period of time ends, you know, there's an automatic lock that you're no longer able to access the storage locker. So that's a good example, and that's an easy example. That's almost like a rubber stamp contract. But when you have more at stake, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to have these smart contracts work. One of the, in service contracts, for example, when you're requiring someone to use reasonable best efforts, for now, I think it's going to be very difficult to write a code. I'm never say never, but I think it's going to be difficult to write a code that will have that sort of judgment involved. When there's human intervention and judgment in a contract, you may not be able to have that trigger to allow, unless you disagree based on what you're seeing out there. But from my standpoint, the legal standpoint, I think that's going to be a tough one for at least the time being. Do you want to?
Well, so it's interesting. There's a company now that's based in Germany that's trying to disrupt Airbnb. And they're doing that by, they've created a smart lock that they put on their front door, and then everything else that Airbnb does, they do. So they have a website that you would go to, you would upload the pictures of the place, your flat in London, where it is, where the tube is, how great the place is. People then come to that. They have their unique ID, so it identifies who they are. You select your place, and then when you show up to this place, the lock knows who you are, when you're supposed to be there, when you're supposed to be checking out. It has the contracts, so the smart contracts built into it. It even knows when you leave for the day to then send another note to somebody to actually come in and to clean. All of that is leveraging the blockchain. So what they've done is they've taken, I think Airbnb probably has 6,000 or 7,000 employees. This organization has 4 or 5. Everything is automated. Everything is completely done through the blockchain, through cryptocurrencies currently. And it's sort of leveraging what we're talking about.
Yeah, and an example I can imagine working as well is just a hotel. I mean, can you imagine just going to a hotel and not having to meet a live person, having a smart contract going right up to your room? I mean, someone would hopefully change the sheets, but otherwise, I mean, you can imagine it's a similar, you can see us going there, where you no longer need someone to physically check you into the hotel. You can do it all in an automated system using these smart contracts, which again are just a way for the hotel or the whatever entity it is that you're getting the space from to have some control over their ability to take back the room once the payment terms have completed. So these are all interesting examples. Again, who's at risk? If you're paying the money, what happens if there's a hack and suddenly you don't have a room, you can't enter your room? Certainly the person who's hopes to be going to sleep that night would be the one who has the risk. And so you want to make sure you have dispute resolution clauses in those agreements. Right now, we're advocating arbitration because that is the easiest way to do it, given the fact that you've got all these jurisdictional issues and governing law issues. Governing law is, you know, what state are we in, what country you're in, what law is going to govern this contract. Certainly you would want to have that provision in there for the very reason of it's technology, and as much control and security as we feel with blockchain, there's still this idea that someone could come in and create a disruption that frankly alleviates the need for the entire contract, and you're stuck without a house or without a place to stay. And again, what happens to the data on exit, that's just something that, depending on what the contract is for, you've got this data sitting there. And I think that's something that we just have to work out as we move through this technology. Okay. We can skip that example and move because we...
So this is another example of what a company that sort of had an ICO, I think they probably had the ICO maybe last year about this time, called Factum. And what they did was they are using blockchain for deeds of property. And this is the idea. So you live on this land, and your family's lived on this beautiful island in Honduras for the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 generations. You know it's yours. Everyone around you knows it's yours. The government today says, yeah, that's yours. But then someone comes up to their ear and whispers into them and says, hey, I'll give you $10 million for that to the government. And the government's like, huh. The government says, it's now no longer yours. 70% of the world's land is actually not really registered to anybody. There's no deed for it. It's a major issue in terms of creating wealth. Quite honestly, that's where most of our wealth comes from, is land ownership, and then it goes from there. So what this company has done is that they've come up with an ability for another blockchain, so another database that is leveraging the ability to store this information about who owns the land. And it's distributed, so it's not just that one government entity that's saying yes or no to it. It's much more than that. It's maybe 1,000 different computers that are all running the same software, that are all in agreement that this is the truth. So they're working on that right now, which I think is pretty fascinating. They're also doing it in Africa, too.
Yeah, and actually, I think in Illinois, they just had, they had a little test in Cook County, Illinois, and they like to think that they're ahead of the curve always, and I'm not saying they're not, but being in that mindset, they did a little test run, and actually, I think the issue that they had is it's so much dependent on so many people being involved, and so they're one county in Illinois, and while they did find it worked, it does require such a standardization of data and so many people to be involved for it to really work beyond just that little county. But certainly they tried it, and I do think like I said in the beginning, in another year we're going to probably sit here and have 5 more counties that have tried it, and in 5 years, I mean, half of America could have tried it. So
yeah, no question.
It takes out the middleman in a real estate transaction, so that you're dealing directly with the chain, which there could be no insurance company. You could have no county that's involved in it. Frankly, the data could all be there, so you'd be able to complete the transaction quite quickly without all these other parties taking money from you during the process of buying that house.
It's interesting. So I think yesterday during the keynote talk, he spoke about how technology is really coming into play where you have these older establishments, whether it's like the government, which they're not going after the government, they're trying to reinvent things. And I think this is a portion of that. You're starting to see where blockchain will come in, and I'm sure they'll try to work with governments, but ultimately it's going to be something where they're going to reinvent it themselves, and then the government's going to see this and say, yes, we'll adopt this. This makes a lot of sense. Because right now everything that's in there would be difficult to change, cumbersome to do so.
Absolutely.
So the next example is a beautiful slide, and I apologize.
Slide gives me a heart attack.
If you can understand this. This is the music licensing ecosystem for royalty payment. So you think, all right, I buy a single song off of iTunes. I pay the 99 cents, whatever it is now. I'm an Android user, so whatever. $1, I think, is it, or whatever, for a song now. It's actually split up in so many different ways. You would think that the artist gets most of the money. It's not necessarily the case. But what typically happens is it's divvied up many, many, many times. So what the blockchain is doing now is you actually have the ability to sort of automate this. Much more so. Taking it to another step, there's a known artist right now who's out, and what she's done is she said, you know what, forget all the record companies, forget the marketers, forget everyone. I'm actually going to produce the music in my studio, turn it to the MP3s, and then release it from my website. And people can pay for the music right there. They can actually download the entire CD, album, whatever you want to call it, collection, Or you can even download a section of the song. If you're a sampler or DJ, you want to just get that piece, you actually would then pay her in, let's say it's a cryptocurrency, a Bitcoin, or even dollars. But it's also then registered in the blockchain, so it knows who has access to this music, for how long, because you could rent it to them for 7 days, a day, for perpetuity. All of these things are possible, and there's groups that are starting to do this right now and leveraging this.
And I'll just jump in, and that's where, again, a smart contract would really work, because you could have those limitations on use in the smart contract, so that if it goes beyond, it just shuts down. It's an automated shutdown, and again, that's where it makes perfect sense, especially if you grow up on the internet. That's how everything works. But certainly in this case, it's seamless, because there's this tracking, this ledger that's tracking all of these transactions. And again, it would just be an if this happens, then we shut it down. Or if you pay more, you get more use.
Yeah, totally.
Yep. And I can say that this is probably the worst slide ever, this IP licensing. It gives me a heart attack every time. But yeah, because I do think that the blockchain is moving, obviously, into the music licensing, and it's going to make it a lot, it's very much a disruptor there. And so smart contracts, we've talked about this. These are just the ways that we see blockchain being used, and we've summarized them here. One of the ones we didn't touch on is the intellectual property, ability to search the intellectual property records through blockchain. So if you had a trademark you want to file, the blockchain could allow you to search all the trademarks on the chain to see if you're able to file, and it could be an automatic process, again, through a smart contract where you get that filing. I'm an IP lawyer as well, and I can tell you that that does also give me a little pause, just because as a trademark practitioner, there's a lot of ways you can argue and get around conflicts with trademarks. So I certainly don't like the automated, oh, there's somebody else that owns this mark, therefore you can't have it. But if we're able to have that judgment and figure out that judgment to allow there to be flexibility to have two people using similar marks but in different industries, I think that that's a way that it could work. Payment systems, we've talked about that. Again, I think it's just because you're dealing with these Bitcoin, that's just a transaction from wallet to wallet. You don't have the delay to make an agreement take longer, or to have the transaction be complete. And online voting, they're saying that blockchain could end up being a solution there, and avoid some of the hacking issues that we may have had. So.
Yeah, one thing on that that's kind of interesting is there's a company that just came out recently that had their ICO, like everyone else does, and we'll get into that just in a second. They had their ICO maybe a month ago, and the company is called Civic. And what they do is they do a combination and what we're talking about is the voting thing, where half of the information you have is actually on your phone or on your device. So all the most important things that you might have, your social security number, your license information, things like that, are local. But then there's information stored, so it's off-chain, so it's local, versus on-chain, so it's on the blockchain. The idea behind this is that, of course, you want to keep the most sensitive things to yourself, but you also want to verify some pieces of information that are important to do so. So, for example, let's say you're going to go to a bar tonight, and what do you need to do? When you show up to the bouncer, you have to show them your ID, your license. On that ID, there is your picture, there's your full address, there's a unique identifier that the government has given you, of course, your birth date. What do they really need to know? All they need to know is that you're of age, that you're 21 and above. So you're giving them all this information that you actually don't need to give. This company, Civic, what they're working on is an identity piece that helps verify who you are and only gives a little bit of information that you need to prove that you are who you are and you're of age. Kind of a neat little tool. And so they'll probably use something like that within the voting as well. Blockchain and ICOs. So I personally think this is one of the most fascinating pieces right now, because it's the early entree where it's getting the most runway. People are going head over heels for this, because when I was at a conference in New York, probably a month ago, and I've never, ever experienced a conference like this in my life. I love ILTA, but I've never seen anything like this. There were newly minted millionaires all around me because they had started investing in these ICOs. Now, ICOs are extremely, extremely risky, but the way that these work is that, let's say you have an idea. Any one of you has an idea. You go to your website, you write a white paper about it. This is what we want to do. We want to build smart contracts in the legal industry. We want to be able to build a website that you don't want to, I apologize, you don't want to use any attorneys, but you want to go to this website and build out simple contracts. They have a GUI or a simple user interface that says, okay, you want to build a lease or something like that. Gives you the language, it tells you the information, and this is all written in the white paper. So you want to invest in this company. You say, oh, this is a great idea. I love what they've written in their white paper. The white paper says, we're going to have our ICO, initial coin offering, which is like an IPO, from this date to this date. So it might be 10 days long. Sometimes it's a certain amount of money that they raise. You go there, and you actually make a donation. They call it a donation to, of course, skirt certain things right now. So you're donating either Ether, so Ethereum's coin or token, or Bitcoin. And you get the address that they give you for the contract. You put in the address, and you send your Ether, you send your Bitcoin to this address. And in return, they give you their coin. So they give you the Sarah coin. So you get these, coin of maybe 10,000 coins that you would get for the one Bitcoin that you give them. So Bitcoin is now $4,000 a coin. And so you get 10,000 of their coins at this initial coin offering. And then you wait for maybe a month or so, and then these coins or this company pops up on this secondary market, just like the NASDAQ, just like the Dow Jones, or just like the New York Stock Exchange. It's not. It's just a separate market that you would then take your tokens over to, so you port them over there to your account, and that's where the valuations just typically skyrocket or bomb. It's an amazing phenomenon. So I just have the top 10 that are up there right now. There are approximately 850 coins or tokens out there right now. Very, very early days. At the very top, I know it's hard to see, so I guess 843 currencies. The market cap is $133 billion right now, which is huge. Bitcoin alone is now going to surpass, I forgot who it was, a major organization in the last few days. Like, I think it was like Facebook or something along those lines. That much of a valuation. PayPal, thank you, yeah. It's early days, but they're saying that this could be the way that we're moving in terms of all the stocks that we currently have. If you have any, will move over here as well. It's a lot more transparent. It's a lot cheaper to get involved with. Okay, so I'll stop there because me blathering on about that.
No, it's, and actually the regulators are paying attention to this.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. As exciting as it is, whenever there's a lot of excitement, that's when the regulators get involved. And just recently there was a report from the SEC on this issue where they did find that the DAO, the Decentralized Automated Organization that had a ICO back in May of 2016, and there was actually a hack involved which brought a lot of attention to that ICO. And do you want to talk about the hack from the techniques?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So they raised $160 million or so, and they were using or leveraging that Ethereum platform, which is the most popular right now. It wasn't Ethereum that was hacked. It was the coders that were programming on top of it. So like anything, right now it seems like the Bitcoin, the Ethereum are very solid in and of themselves, but what's happening on top of it, programmers that are working with it are making mistakes sometimes. Like anything, there's going to be bugs in the system.
Yeah.
So
I think there was like 60 million siphoned off as a result of that, which generated a lot of attention. And it caused the FTC to issue a report that just came out in the last week or so, basically where they said that the exchanges have to be registered, or they recommended they be registered if they meet certain qualifications. And what they look at is the definition of what an investment contract is. And that's when you have someone investing money, and they actually said that the Bitcoin were money, or the tokens that you're putting forward are money. The SEC said that in exchange for the investment into an opportunity to earn more, which again, we had that here. And then the final piece, which is the one where they spent some time thinking about, was whether the investment depended on the managerial efforts of a third party, someone else. And here they found that that was the case. And this is where we may be able to find some wiggle room to avoid SEC regulation, which is why it's the interpretation of the law at this point. They didn't come down and hammer it. They said if you meet these qualifications, you should register. And that third element, the reason they found that managerial effort is because, like Joe said, is when you were writing those white papers with the proposals, there was actually a human intervention, a layer of people who were deciding which of those white papers were going to be up for the votes. And so that was, they called those curators, those people that were deciding what proposals to put forward to be voted on or have those tokens be put forward. And that human intervention was the managerial effort that they found that triggered the registration requirement. So, you know, again, the lawyers, our job is to interpret this, and there's that little wiggle room there at the end. So if we can figure out how to get around that managerial effort, which is what the SEC focused on, then there may be a way to avoid the registration requirement. But as of now, they have come out and said that these are risky and that they should be registered. So, and that, again, was probably 10 days ago. So it's early days. We'll see what happens and how the industry reacts to that. I wouldn't be surprised if they continue to try to follow it with an exception to avoid that registration requirement.
Well said. So there's one thing that I would add on to that I think is sort of important to know. It's a little nuance. So we hear tokens and we hear coins. So coins, and they're not obviously physical coins, but I've talked to some people and they actually think that Bitcoin actually has a gold coin that's still out there. They're actually, the coin itself, if you're talking about a coin, it's usually because it's monetary. It's money. It actually is a new form of money, just like you would find with the euro or the dollar, or anything like that. It's actually a currency. The other piece that's important, and it goes to what she was saying, is the token. So a token isn't necessarily money in this world. It's basically you're getting these tokens to push through the contract. For example, in the smart contract instance where, I'll use an example of that will. For it to be processed and actually put into the blockchain, there are computers that are running this, that actually have to put it into that blockchain. That's programming time. It's the energy, the electricity of actually making sure that it's put there. So what Ether does, that Ether, which is a token, not really a coin, is that you're paying to make sure that that contract gets put onto the blockchain. So you're paying a tiny little bit of Ether to somebody somewhere for doing that. They call it gas. It basically gets the contract done. And it ranges based on how urgent it is for you to actually get that contract put onto the blockchain. It could be a few cents to do that in Ether, or upwards of $1 or $2, depending on the volume of traffic that's going on with those nodes and how many people are trying to upload things to the blockchain.
Is the token like a token you get at the arcade?
Kind of, yeah, it is. It's
yeah,
exactly.
I mean, where you
represents.
Put money in and you get the tokens, and then you can use the tokens for the transactions, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
Well said. Yeah.
So I think that at this point, you know, the slide here is basically saying what I just summarized and what Joe was summarizing. So at this point, we're in a regulated space, I think. I think we should assume that, like I said, until the industry reacts by possibly changing the way it does things a little bit. Certainly, the SEC is focused on it. I wouldn't be surprised if new law was even developed to regulate this, because there's such a frenzy for this, and when there's a frenzy, the regulators often get involved.
And so one of the things that's happening right now is that a lot of companies, and it's actually not a good thing in my opinion. So a lot of these companies that are doing their ICOs in the beginning, did them in the United States. Now they're moving offshore because they see these SEC guidance and guidelines coming out, and they're concerned, and they don't want to get involved in that. So they're offshoring it. And to the point where if you wanted to invest in one of these places, as you go to their website on the day that it opens up, they're going to look at your IP address. If it's coming from, of course, a US-based IP address, then they're going to forbid you from doing it. Obviously, there's ways around that through VPNs or other means, but it's early days. Yeah. And it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out.
And in the FTC report, they gave a bunch of different guidelines for those who are considering doing the exchanges. And they just said to take your time, and that if you feel the pressure to put those tokens forward, and if you feel pressured, that could be a sign that possibly you're dealing with an entity that you don't want to maybe work with. And certainly they said just make sure you see a plan and you see a proposal before you move forward, similar to how you would normally invest. But it's because this industry is different, and it's a different type of mentality in it right now. They're having to put out this guidance as if we have new investors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you deal with any of your law firms, have clients in the financial industry, they are scratching their head right now because many of these newer companies are going to go down this road potentially and work around the fact that they'd have to go through JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley. All of the fees, all of that aspect could be sort of thrown out the door. So yeah, we shall see.
Yeah. Well, I think that concludes the presentation. I don't know if we have any questions at this point. We have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, there's a mic. If anybody has any questions about anything, we'll do our best to answer.
Yeah, really interesting talk. Thank you. Given that the people involved in a transaction are anonymous and that the impetus for starting these exchanges is to be extra governmental and extra legal, what leverage do governments have? I mean, I understand they can be the gatekeepers when regular currency goes in and out of the exchanges, but for transactions that occur entirely on the exchange, is there any leverage to regulate?
So,
very good question.
It's a great question. So one of the bigger exchanges right now, it's not really exchange because there's just 3 coins that they offer. Coinbase, based in San Francisco, basically you can trade or buy Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum. The IRS, I think, went to them recently and actually was going to subpoena or ask them for every single account that was in excess of $10,000 that was transferred in. They were like, no, you can't do that. You just can't do that right now. So the bigger exchanges, they're going to get some of that coming after them, but the ones that are in Germany or around the world, in China, I don't know how. I honestly do not know how the government is going to go after these things.
I agree. And you know, from the international clients that I have, it's kind of, oh, the SEC, you know, it's sort of a laugh, like, oh, that's U.S., you know, because they'll just move it, you know, or they're not operating in the U.S. They already have considered the fact that they want to avoid that regulation. So it's a good question, and I think it's how they're thinking as well, you know.
How would we go about selecting an exchange?
Great question. So if there was a particular coin or token that you were interested in, you can actually look it up and then it'll list probably the top 10 exchanges. You want to go to the exchange that has the most volume because then you know you're going to get the best rate for that particular coin.
Go back to that slide that you had.
Sure.
You had some volume there.
Factors such as exchange being regulated. I understand New York State regulates some exchanges.
I haven't heard anything about that yet, but I would assume at some point anything that's going to be in the United States will probably be regulated, I guess.
They were regulated by New York State.
Sure.
Oh my gosh.
So a little bit more about the smart contracts that you talked about.
Sure.
Is this a product you already have, or is it theory?
This is early days. I have seen, actually talked with an insurance company that's working on that, the one that I gave in terms of the will and estate. They're actually working on that. I have seen another organization actually build out the tenant-landlord piece. So those are in existence, but again, very early days, but I think this is going to move very quickly.
Hi, I don't know that you can specifically provide an answer to this question, but I wonder if you have thoughts around a contract that is created today, and I really love the slide on the automated contract, but things change in the future, such as, okay, let's say this was a valid contract while I was not incarcerated, but now I'm in prison, and disbursements now suddenly can change. Let's say a government changes the definition of marriage, using that as a specific example, but the disbursement has already occurred after the fact. Do you have any thoughts as to how an automated contract could be amended potentially in the future to address what are the new definitions that are understood?
So from the tech, you can probably answer to the technical side, but from the legal side, certainly, you know, again, when you're writing that initial contract that gets put into code, you would want to work with somebody that thinks through some of those issues. Certainly, you're thinking way outside the box with the incarcerated. You know, those are things that may be difficult to predict. I don't know, maybe not, but but I don't know. So yeah, you'd want to be able to predict some certain things that you could anticipate. As for whether the code, if we're there yet, where the code can respond to those predictions that the lawyer writes in, I'm not sure.
I think eventually it could be done, no question, but it's something they all have to think about. I mean,
Right.
people talk about when code becomes law. We're getting there.
Well, it would seem to me that it would behoove you to write the contract very simply and objectively as compared to,
Yeah.
100-page.
It's going to, exactly, and that's why I said it's going to change the way I think lawyers are trained as these contracts get more and more prevalent, certainly, yeah.
Right over here. So just to be clear, a smart contract, it's a combination of the blockchain and then executable code, right?
Yes and no. So it's the first part. It is actually the blockchain itself. You can actually, that is the smart contract in and of itself, but you can add code on top of it to make it more enhanced, to do other things. And so that example that I gave has a few things going on there.
So computer code, I mean, it's more precise than English. You know, there are a lot of things that you could communicate clearly in computer code that would be, I guess, more ambiguous in English, but there's still huge potential for bugs. In fact, your slide had a bug in it.
It did. Yeah, good eyes. It did.
So, you know, how does one verify that the contract is correct? And then, I guess, who's writing these contracts? Are the contracts being put in the hands of computer programmers, or do they need to be attorneys and programmers? How does this work?
No, great question. So it's like anything today. So you have an attorney that's drafting something. They're probably going to have errors in that, and it's going to be vetted many times by different people, hopefully, maybe even by a computer, to look for issues in that. Nothing is going to be perfect. I think over time, it would start getting better and better in terms of the coding on top of that. And I do think as we move forward with almost everything, there's going to be a combination of attorney and developer or coder, something in between. Thomson Reuters talks about this T-shaped attorney coming out of law school, and that is this attorney that basically has, it looks like a T, right? So they have understanding of project management, they understand of the vendors, of e-discovery, a whole bunch of random things. They might even understand programming, so they've taken some classes in programming, but then they have something very in-depth that they know really well. So I think as we move forward, we're going to get to the point where attorneys are going to have to work together collaboratively with programmers in some form or function.
And I will say, just jumping in, as an attorney, sometimes the ambiguity works in your favor. And so, you know, it's a good question because you're right, but sometimes you were intentionally ambiguous because you want to be able to argue, you know, that there's another scenario that works better for you.
Yeah, I guess the difference being that if a contract written in English is ambiguous, you go to court to fight it out, whereas with a smart contract, it automatically executes. The computer makes no judgment. So I have a follow-up question. Do you see any computer languages being developed specifically for smart contracts? Like in the example, you know, an imperative programming language probably isn't ideal for a smart contract, you know, because you're telling the computer what to do step by step rather than what you want.
The primary language actually slips my mind right now, but it's very similar to JavaScript.
Okay, that's what it looked like.
Why is there no backseas on a misdirected financial transaction?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Why can't you undo a misdirected financial transaction?
It's the immutability of it. I mean, goes to the core of its sort of stability around that. I'm sure there's going to be ways to adjust that, saying, okay, this recording of this piece of information is inaccurate. And then both parties will have to take a step back and say, it was wrong here, let's adjust it this way. But at its base level, in terms of going back to that white paper that we saw, it's about making sure that that is there, done, complete. But if the two parties get together and say, hey, actually, there was a mistake here, they can then fix that going forward. Good question.
Can you talk a little bit about bit license legislation and any prevalence of enforcement of needing a business license for selling Bitcoin?
Business licenses?
Can you say it again?
Yeah,
the
bit
beginning
license
part, sorry.
legislation. So New York, for example, has bit license legislation requiring that there's a business license in order to sell Bitcoin as a, but I don't know, and I've just heard tale of, some crackdown enforcement on that, and I just don't know how prevalent it is.
I think we're going to see more of it. Certainly at this point, it's, we're talking about this right now, and I can say a year ago it was something that, like I said, everybody was waking up to, and the laws take a little longer, but I do think you're going to see more of it until the industry starts to lobby against that.
In Delaware. So Delaware is the first state to actually have adopted this. They did it last year, and there was something that came out recently that they're going to be incorporating the blockchain into that piece that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think Arizona and Nevada have already said that smart contracts are legal contracts, so you're going to see more of that as well. Yeah, that's a complicated question. I mean, we can talk afterwards, but that's kind of a big. It's the essence of applying very, very old law to a smart contract, which I'm not sure is going to work. But yeah, from my standpoint, I don't know how they're going to apply that to what we have here, which is basically an if-then transaction. If this occurs, then this will occur. And the UCC is so archaic in so many ways. Certainly the UCC lawyers, though, maybe they'll find a way to make it and come back into the fray. But yeah.
Okay.
On the topic of hacking, can you kind of elaborate a little bit more why blockchain is safe from hacking?
Safe from hacking. I don't know if anything, honestly, is safe from hacking. But the way that it's set up currently is that, so we'll use Bitcoin as an example. With, I think, 10,000 nodes or computers that are all running the same software, that all need to verify that something's going through. The stat that I heard, I'm not sure it's 100% accurate or not, was that you need the electricity or the power that Google has times 7 to be able to upend and change a block that is done incorrectly within Bitcoin. So if you were to try to change, like, I have $1 million in my wallet, and you wanted to change that to like 10 million or something like that, it would take that power that Google has to be able to do that. So it's almost impossible there. Where you have one entity that you could take down, whether it be a big bank, you can target that with denial of service, whatever the case is. That's one that you're taking down. You would have to do that to all the other servers, all the other nodes. That's one thing. The encryption there, it's using public key encryption at a higher level. So it's something that is known, it's trusted in the banks. There's a lot of really good, solid evidence for it being really good. I won't go past that because there's always something that could potentially come up.